Started. Welcome to the virtual opening of the Safe Home exhibit and a conversation with artist Kellen Hatanaka. I'm Sherri Kajiwara, the director curator of the Nikkei National Museum. And we are in two separate locations here. I am coming from my home office, and Kellen is seated inside his exhibit at the Nikkei National Museum. So we are both coming to you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish and Hunkaminam speaking peoples. And at the Nikkei National Museum, we are truly honored and grateful to live, work, and play on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Kwee-Quitlam First Nations. If you get a chance to come visit us in person, the exhibit will be open through the end of April. We are closed for a bit during Christmas, New Year's, that time, and on stat holidays, but we are otherwise open with safe pandemic protocols, and when we have special events, we try to keep the gallery open and actually free for visitors then. So tomorrow, we have our final Nikkei Garden Farmers Market, and from 10 to 2, the exhibit will be open then as well. Safe Home by Kellen Hatanaka centers around the Vancouver Asahi baseball story, a team that came from humble beginnings and rose to sports superstardom from 1914 to 1942, when they were permanently disbanded and enfolded in the forced removal of approximately 22,000 Canadians of Japanese ancestry from coastal British Columbia following the events of the Second World War. Now, this is not a literal visual interpretation of the Asahi story. The Asahi provide the anchor for Kellen's work. So, Kellen, tell me about your initial inspiration for this body of work and what the internment era might mean to you.
Sure, yeah. So I guess obviously the first inspiration came from the team itself. Learning about the team, quite late into my life. I never heard about the story before, and it was just really inspiring to know that there was this all Japanese Canadian baseball team, and not only did they play and exist in a very difficult time for Japanese Canadians, but they were also very prolific and a dynasty as well. So that was the initial focus of the work, and thinking about, I'd like to do something around that theme. And I'd like to thank the work that Pat Adachi did, especially the book that she produced, because that was something that really helped me get into the history of the team and what the team meant to the community. And there's a cool story that goes along with that. When I was shopping, Christmas shopping one year at Sanko in Toronto, I found a copy of the book just on one of the shelves. So it happened kind of by chance, which has been really fortuitous for this body of work. But when I started thinking about what the work should be about the team, it became pretty clear to me early on that they would actually serve as quite a strong metaphor for the effects of internment. Specifically, the loss of Japanese Canadian identity. We think a lot about, Japanese identity within Canada often being about tradition or culture that comes directly from Japan or from, people's homelands. And one of the things that we have as a Japanese Canadian symbol of identity is the team, because it's sort of a merge of the two cultures into one distinct and unique team. And another thing that I think really was, it was very powerful to think about with the team was the idea of assimilation, and, how do people assimilate, and what are you having to navigate and give up when you try to assimilate into a different, distinct culture. And I think the great thing about the team is that they operated within something that seems inherently Western, which is baseball, but they had to find their own way to play the game. So it became their own thing that was Japanese Canadian.
Absolutely. And Pat Adachi really was the heritage trailblazer who never let the story of the Asahi die. And I don't know if you know this, but 20 years ago, another Nikkei trailblazer and champion of the Asahi is the original director curator of our museum when it was then called the Japanese Canadian National Museum, Grace Aiko Thompson. And she's really carried Pat Adachi's work forward to exhibits. Her first early exhibit here, well, it wasn't her first, but one of her early exhibits here is called Leveling the Playing Field, and it was all about the Asahi. And she also advocated for and successfully got Parks Canada to install a plaque commemorating the Asahi in Oppenheimer Park, which is their original playing field. She also, the list goes on, but she also project managed the English translation of a book on the Asahi written by Norio Goto in Japanese. And we have copies of that in our museum gift shop. And then also consulted on a heritage minute all about the Asahi when it was their 100th anniversary of their first pennant win not too long ago. And very much like how Pat is your muse for this exhibit, the Safe Home exhibit, Grace is very much a mentor in the work that I do at the Nikkei National Museum. But let's talk about the artwork now. So behind you, we can see, and this is what people will see when they come into the gallery space, three larger than life figures. Can you tell us more about them?
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, the three figures that you can see behind me now are larger scale works based on some smaller work that I did, really the earlier works that I did on the team when I was trying to figure out how I wanted to approach the subject matter. And I think, as you mentioned, they're not meant to replicate or represent any specific player. I didn't want to do that specifically because number one, I wanted it to be more about the team, and I also don't really. I felt like I couldn't, even though I had the research, I didn't want to get anything wrong or misrepresent someone. So as well, the team was, there were many teams that existed for many different years. So to zone in on one team in particular didn't really fit for the work. The scale of the work is really important because I wanted to embody what the team meant to the community. It's also talked about quite a bit that the team, their physical stature was quite a bit smaller than the players that they had to play against within the league. Despite that, they had this larger than life presence within the community and with the way that they competed. These pieces also have a back component. I think we'll go take a look and move around those now so you can see. And the idea with that is that the players were supported by the community and also put the community on their back, so to speak. When they played every game, they represented the community and inspired the community with the way that they played. So the backside of these pieces each represent a different aspect of the community. So the first one on the left with the green panels is meant to represent sort of business and the community. This is probably one of the more personal ones for me personally, because when I was doing some research with the museum here, we learned that my grandfather and great grandfather owned a grocery store before they were forcefully removed from their homes. So I added the address in there and also sort of a nod to the grocery bag. And the rotting persimmon in the middle also sort of speaks to the idea of the speed at which people had to pack up and leave, and left behind things like in the case of a store, the produce and everything, which I imagine may have just gone to waste. So that was sort of the symbolism that I added for that. The center panel is more about the home, and I also included a nod to the lumber industry and also boat building, which is a big part of the community as well. And there are some other symbols in here, such as the teapot, that are reoccurring themes in the work, and they're meant to symbolize different things. Mainly that they are indicative of items you might find within the community, but there are other meanings behind it as well. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. The third panel here is about the fishing industry, which was, one of the biggest industries that the community was working within. And also our family had a tie to that too. with my grandfather being an avid fisherman, but also my grandmother's side, they worked in a cannery. So there's a personal connection there, as well as quite an important part of the Japanese Canadian community at the time that they saw you were playing. So we'll just move back around, take a look at those, and we'll move back to the seat.
Thanks so much, Kellen.
Yeah,
And it really is fantastic that we can have this little virtual tour, but do hope that many of the audience are able to come see this in person. So, what medium are you working with, both in the paintings, and we got little bits of sculpture? There is also sculpture in the exhibit as well. Can
that's
you
right.
talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so the overarching material that I have in the exhibit, both for painting and sculptures, is paper, and I arrived at that in a little bit of a sort of fortuitous way. I started when I was working on those larger figures. I was just working on paper because it was a quick way to do some studies, and I really appreciated the quality of the paper and in terms of the color, but also the way that it reacted to the paint, because it's not really meant to hold that kind of material, but it gives a very textural and almost sculptural element to the work, especially in the paintings. And I really appreciated that feel, because one of the ideas I had with the work is not just to focus on the team, but also the community. And of course, the community going out to support the team, you can imagine, like they do now, people would bring signs and other things to cheer on their team. And so I like the feeling that maybe some of the paintings could be seen as similar to a sign that fans would bring to the stadium to support the team. And so it becomes almost like an object and a painting at once, which I really liked the feel of that and the way that it connected to the story. Similarly, for the sculptures, paper was important because I liked, again, the humble material, but using it and building it up through paper mache or putting layers of paper pulp together. It's small pieces of delicate material coming together and becoming a very strong and tactile piece. And I just felt that sort of represents the strength of community coming together, which really embodies the way that the Japanese community work together. A lot of the sculpture too, because of the way it's made with paper, it's an organic shape, and it can't be tamed, so to speak. There is a little bit of happy accidents, if you will, while you're working with it. And to me, I feel like it captures the feeling, the sort of duality within the work of looking in the past and dealing with memory, but also imagining what a future could have been if the team hadn't been disbanded. So I think about the way and the quality of the sculptures as being a way to think about memory, and it being an archive of the past, but not something that is exact. And I really like that feeling that it brought.
Very cool. Your style is quite unique and very colorful with lots of energy. It's almost deceptively naive, but at first glance. But then as you look closer, there are many layers of meaning, and as you've already alluded to, it's rift with metaphor. Can you share how you describe your style? And you did mention a little bit about the futurism, but maybe explain that a bit more for our audience.
Sure. So the I think one of the main themes that runs through this, and especially when thinking about internment, is the idea of loss. Loss of building, of business, property, memories, community, in terms of what was left behind, but also a loss of what could have been had internment not impacted this community's life. So it's a bit of a difficult thing to grapple with, especially this idea of what might have been. And one way that I felt that I could kind of tackle that is imagining, where the team may have gone if they had been able to continue to grow. And thinking about, obviously it was a smaller community, it was growing and growing, so there'd be more players. So some of those items that are sculptures are meant to appear as either imagined memorabilia items from the Asahi team that may have been left behind, behind because they weren't able to bring them with them to the camps, or items that could have existed if the team continued on. So you'll notice on some of the pieces, the dates are, into the 90s, which obviously are well past their operating timeline, but it's meant to sort of give a thought about where would they have been and how would the team have grown. Another really important thing for me and approach that I took in the work early on was to try not to focus so much on the darkness of the subject matter, which of course was, a very traumatic, very difficult time. And I think it's easy to go that way with the work, and certainly would be appropriate. But I also wanted to remember and sort of portray the idea that this team was celebrated and is something that should be celebrated still, and they did bring joy to the community. And also thinking that even within the most difficult times, the community was able to find joy even in the camps. Thinking about, for one example, again with baseball, is playing baseball in the internment camps and finding a little bit of a respite in that. And so a lot of the work it is more of a joyful celebratory approach on the surface, but underneath it there still is that darker undertone. And some of the ways that I included that are through the symbols like you mentioned. So there are things that I included, such as brands or logos that are from contemporary companies, and I included those to think about, not only draw parallels between how this team was seen with this community and how we see athletes today, but maybe some of those athletes would have had the opportunity to go on and become athletes of that nature, of that stature, and have endorsements and have advertisements based around their play and their sort of celebrity. Another thing that I was including as well is some nods to food, as specifically hot dogs, which are obviously associated with baseball, but as well became part of some Japanese Canadian and Japanese American dishes, and worked their way into sort of like a hybrid culture as well. So there's a nod to that there. Of course, fishing was a big part of the community, and also the fish as well can be seen as good luck, good fortune. So I wanted to use that to sort of show how the team uplifted and brought a good fortune in a way to the community. Another item that I included, and I mentioned earlier, and it's in a few places, including a larger sculptural piece, is the teapot. And originally I was including that in my work because it's obviously something that is very important culturally and something that many people would have in their home. But I was thinking about it later on, and thinking of looking at it and realizing it's a really strong metaphor, I think, for how I understood my grandmother and her experience, and the way that she had to explain and teach to us the experience. And she always seemed to want to let us know that something had happened, but there was obviously a lot that was guarded and held inside. So I felt that the teapot was a really beautiful way to think about that idea, where it's a very calm exterior, but inside there's this sort of raging, active, hot liquid. And so I thought that could be seen as an anger, or just any kind of sort of difficult feeling that's being masked by the calmness of the exterior of the teapot.
Your story of your grandmother, which you shared with me before, was really poignant, and again speaks to the layers of metaphor in your work. But back to something you just said earlier in response to my question about the bringing in contemporary themes and ideas. And I know you articulated in conversation with me before this that you were also taking almost a what if, like what if internment never happened? What if the Asahi had never been disbanded? And, could they have, I mean, they were on this massive trajectory before it all came crashing down. And you drew a parallel in one of your pieces to a contemporary baseball player. I'm going to look at my notes, Shohei Ohtani. And I think you call it Showtime. And what I loved about your explanation of that piece is you're really trying to articulate, like, with a real example of someone who is definitely, I'm going to look at my notes right now, an important figure because of his unbelievable achievement, often being compared to Babe Ruth and perhaps even better in some people's estimation. But despite his sensational play, he has been met with overt racism by public figures, and so this is also another theme that underlies your work. And while we have come a long way, we hope, since the Asahi day, the original Asahi days, the MLB is still not ready to have the face of its league be a Japanese one. And that's a pretty powerful contemporary example of real issues, which again, it's only one piece in all of this, but it's a pretty powerful one. Um, I'm I have a last question for you, which is when we first talked about this exhibit, the working title was actually different from what we landed on. And as you and I developed this further, I know we had some great conversations about the duality of language, the duality of meanings, the conceptualization of ideas, and really how to articulate all of that visually. And you've already spoken a bit about the recurring symbols and themes. Now, I'm not sure. I'm pulling a quickie on the technical expertise of Coco and Nicola behind the camera. But is it possible to maybe walk up to some of the pieces as you zero in on some of these recurring symbols and themes that you just mentioned?
Sure, I think we could do that.
Great.
We'll start over in one side and kind of just pan over. So um, yeah, so there's many different items that I used for meaning, and this is one of the last works that I finished. And actually, some of the elements here are taken from Chesuke packaging, which is something that we had as kids that was just felt like really special to us. So that's more of a personal touch. So these arrows and the mask and even these sort of abstracted salmon pieces are taken from that packaging. And again, that's sort of like me adding my personal experience into the work, but also thinking about, if the players had continued on and had endorsements, would they have had endorsements from, brands and companies that we kind of expect players in North America to have, but also like perhaps other more culturally significant brands as well. Similarly, in this one, the Pocari sweat is covered up, but that's part of it as well. And I brought in again sort of a very abstracted decaying persimmon there that echoes the Epic banner as well, and including SKYDOME too. That kind of has two meanings. Again, the one is what if would the players have reached kind of that level, but also the nod to the visit that the players had to the SKYDOME years ago. This is the piece that we were just talking about, entitled Showtime, which actually is his nickname. And so, it's sort of, he's kind of looking up at the Major League Baseball logo, and it's sort of, it almost looks like he's waving as to say, like, he's not quite able to attain that next step to be accepted as the face of the, or as like, the big player of the league, at least by some people. The old TSN logo is in there just because, again, I'm playing with different timelines. And for me, that's something I kind of remember as being very iconic, especially watching sports with my father. So I felt like that was a nice tie in there as well. In this piece, I've incorporated the teapot, which I mentioned already, and a fishing hook, and then adding in the Adidas logo to kind of bring in that contemporary brand, to have that discussion about what level they could have gotten to. And here we're kind of bringing in as well, like you said, the terms and typography and the duality of language. And the context of baseball, we understand it to be just something that is a term that we use for certain parts of play. But when you think about it in the context of interment, it becomes pretty dark. And I felt that that use of language, and you'll see there's some more as we go through, was really powerful. And it's probably something that I'll continue to work on even further on with more work. But, ideas of out or home, and the same with the name of the title as well. Thinking about home plate being a safe place, and wondering and thinking about, home home is supposed to be a place that's safe. And, obviously for the players, even at times the baseball diamond wasn't even a safe place, and certainly home was not necessarily a safe place either. So there's a duality there that I think is quite powerful. And this another piece here is another symbol we didn't talk about, but the daruma is a traditional Japanese doll. And one of the things that people do often is color in one of the eyes when they sort of set a goal or an intention, and the other one is meant to be filled in once that is met. And so all of the figurines that are included in this work, there are some sculptures as well, only have one eye colored in, and that's to sort of symbolize the fact that the true potential of the team and the community in general hasn't been able to be reached because of what happens with internment. So that's a pretty important symbol as well. I don't know how we're doing for time, but I'll just keep going through. This piece, there's a subtle nod here as well. So I intentionally set up the figures to show a front and a profile. And it's a bit of a nod to the way that mugshots are taken. And in these works, there's still a very celebratory, sort of joyful feeling to them, but there's that undertone of, Japanese Canadians being seen as enemies and a sort of criminal in a way. And so that's a way that I felt that I could kind of play with that duality within the work as well. And along the top, I've included these sort of empty baseball diamonds or diamonds with the tar paper shacks, which were the living conditions of the community once they were removed. So the idea of an empty field I thought was a really powerful way to think about the loss of the team as well. These pieces on bookending the dish here are showing fishermen from imagine from the community, and they're out doing their work, but they're sort of wearing the ball caps, similar to the way that we all wear sports team paraphernalia when we're out doing our everyday thing to show our support of the team. And this piece kind of really touches on that idea of the hot dog. It's called Sad Lunch, so it's sort of like the disappointment of not having all of the ingredients and the food items that maybe the community used to have, and having to make do once they were living in the internment camps. Here we have a couple of the sculptures. So this is like a sort of like a commemorative bottle opener, just thinking about something that you might see a sports team having, and this is sort of the 93 champs version. So it's talking about that sort of future view through that little detail. And then this piece here it's called Terminal Legacy. And again, it has that dual meaning. The team played in the Terminal League here in Vancouver when they were active, but of course also the terminal meaning to end, or is sort of like their legacy coming to a halt. And it's a trophy with tons of space for all of the titles to be put on, and it's being empty, representing sort of the loss of opportunities to continue winning more and more championships. This figurine here is created with paper mache, and it's meant to represent, either, I like to think of it as maybe something like that would be like a homemade sort of superhero figurine that maybe someone had made for their kids. So it's sort of like an imagined, fan DIY kind of figurine that may have represent something that got left behind when people had to leave, and just showing that how important the team would be for the community. This piece kind of inspired the namesake of the show, and it's a player sliding towards home plate or home, and the title is Safe at Home, and it's sort of a question mark as to whether or not people feel safe at home, and whether, I mean, did he, sort of beat the throw to the plate or to home, or is he going to be out? So, and up in the top, there's some sort of screaming fans, and I thought that that was a great way to think about the, are they fans of the team that are excited, or are these, some of the people that they would have met that didn't feel that they belonged on the field, and that's something that they had to deal with as well. So it's sort of ambiguous as to whether or not this was a safe space or not. And moving on, I think we're almost through. So this piece is called No Escaping This, and it's a player caught between two opposing figures. And, this, again, a feeling of, is this person safe? Are they caught between these two figures? And are they going to be able to make it, or are they going to be caught, basically? And then one last painting, which is another teapot, and it's an imagined sort of memorabilia piece of the team. And it's sort of set, it's very subtle, but it's meant to look like it's sitting within a tar paper shack. And it's this thought that, like, even in the worst of times, I thought it's really admirable to think about the resiliency of the community and how they were able to make it through, but also that, there were things like the Asahi that really helped people to find little bits of joy even in those circumstances. So that's what that painting is meant to represent. And because that symbol was so important to the work, it was made into this larger three-dimensional sculpture, which is paper pulp on a wire armature and then painted with enamel to kind of make it appear to be ceramic. So it's a sort of an echoing of that painting.
And Kellen, the lid to that teapot is a
Yes.
ball hat, right?
Yeah. So it's sort of a fun. It's almost like a bit of bringing the teapot to life in a way, and the painting is also done that way too.
Behind you, there's also a suspension hanging. Could you
Oh
talk a bit
yes.
about that?
Right. Yeah. So this is, basically like an oversized fishing lure, and again, it's a nod to the importance of fishing to the community, and also, how incredible Japanese fishers were, and how successful they were, and that's one of the reasons why there was such attention in the community. So I wanted to tie those things together, and again try to think about, like, what, if the team had survived and moved on, or even at the time, like, would they have fishing lures that celebrate the team? So they're a little like this design here is based on one of the old patches from the Asahi uniform. It's the same as this one here too. So it's got this sort of like raised but within almost a baseball diamond shape. And there, that's again something that I got from the books, where there are different versions of the jerseys, and there's some really beautiful designs that they incorporated into it. On the back, it's a different uh, design. So this is another one of the patches, this sort of sun motif. And then on these other pieces hanging out, again, we have some of the terminology, the out and steal. And again, steal, the idea of stealing. The Sai were prolific base stealers, and they used their speed as one of the ways that they got around being smaller players, but also within the context of internment, it has a very dark meaning as well. So that's another example of using language to try to talk about that. And then obviously the fish hooks are on the end, just to finish off the piece. Yeah.
And are there a couple smaller sculptures just beside that?
Yes. Yeah. So I think the last two pieces are these two. So these are the versions of the doll that I was talking about with the single eye painted in. And those are created in a bit of a different style of paper mache. So there's a Japanese style paper mache called hariko, and basically a wooden mold is covered with paper mache, and then it's cut off and the two parts are rejoined. So they're both hollow, And I just really like that idea of being able to make multiples over the same shape. And it was just a really interesting process to try out and utilize for this work as well. So there's a bit of that Japanese tradition put into the way that these pieces are created.
That's great, Kellen. We can let you sit down again now. Thank
Okay,
you for the walk through the space
sure, no
and
problem.
for also giving us some insight into your work and your process. For those of you who are watching, you might have also caught behind the last frame when Kellen was showing us his daruma. There's also some cases. That is a small heritage display that we've drawn from our permanent collection of photographs, medals, ephemera that once belonged to members of the original Vancouver Asahi team. And there is one case dedicated entirely to Kei Kamanishi, who is the only surviving team member today. And fun fact, he turns 100 on January 11. So a big important birthday coming up, and Kellen, he's promised to come see the exhibit in person. So he couldn't make it today, but we will walk him through all of that since you've given us such rich detail to relay. And it's really been a pleasure to work with you, Kellen. Before we hand it off to questions or comments, did you have any last words or thoughts that you wanted to share?
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. I just wanted to say, thank you to you and everyone here at the museum for working with me on this and for helping me bring it to life because it's, obviously a very important personal body of work. And it's been wonderful working with you on this. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in to walk through it and listen to what the work is about.
That's great. And a reminder for those of you who are in town tomorrow, we're not normally open Sunday, Mondays, but tomorrow is the final farmers market of the Nikkei Garden Farmers Market, and the exhibit will be open while the market is going on, which is 10 till 2. It's going to be pouring rain, but we'll make sure that there's a lot of places to leave your wet gear before you come in and interact with all the paper. But the exhibit, again, will be up through the end of April. And you can find more details on our website. I'm going to hand this off now to Nicola Ogiwara, our museum programmer, who together with our intern Kokozo have been working their technical magic behind the scenes to handle this comments and questions section. Nicola, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sherri and Nicola. Okay, so I'm going to welcome the audience to share comments or ask questions. If you're on Zoom, you can go ahead and unmute. If you're on YouTube, I can read if you would like to type any comments or questions. While we're waiting for people to warm up, my impression of the exhibit working with Kellen installing for the 2 days, it was a nice change around the Asahi materials. We're so used to seeing black and white photos, but all the images were so colorful and fun, and like the material and texture of the paper. And I'm especially a fan of daruma, so I like the different daruma and the paper mache figures. And it was quite unique that you can see the work directly, not through a piece of glass. So it's a bit nerve-wracking, but it's really nice from a viewer's perspective. So yeah, it's a really fun exhibit to come to see. And there's also the Heritage Corner to learn about the Asahis. Lots of people know about the history, but there's probably still some people who don't. So Yeah, it's really interesting how the Asahi story doesn't cease. It just keeps growing and growing. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to share their impressions or ask questions?
Nicola, I also forgot to say earlier when we were talking about Pat Adachi that we have borrowed her interview from our friends at the JCCC. And it's an interview with her from their Sedai platform. And we're playing it on a loop on a monitor in the museum foyer, which is just before you enter the gallery. So for visitors who are able to come in person, there is that element also added to the exhibit.
So we have a few questions. One's from Lisa. Did Kellen set a intention or goal when he painted in the daruma eyes?
No, I guess I didn't. I was thinking more about what it meant symbolically, but I assume I could say that it would be to complete the work in time to make it here for the opening. But no, mostly it was about that idea that it was there was sort of this arrested or unfinished kind of goal.
Do you think you'll paint them in when the exhibit finishes?
That's a good. I mean, it would be a nice way to finish it, but I feel like the symbolism of it not being done is it's not so much about me. I mean, I guess it's difficult because I had to put the eye in to start, but it was more. It really was meant to be seen as the team not being able to complete whatever their journey would have been. So I'll probably leave it unfinished.
We have another question from Trisha. What Japanese Canadian recipes have hot dogs? My family made tomato spaghetti with hot dogs.
The one that I'm thinking of, and I have to say I would have to double check. I know it's called like Weenie Royal, I think, and I'm not sure if it's both Japanese Canadian and Japanese American, but I did come across that in my research, so that's the one that I was kind of thinking of.
I'm going to weigh in too. If you look back at the archives of the Bulletin magazine, John Endo Greenaway, the editor, did a whole feature on Nikkei comfort food, and many of us were invited to submit recipes. And the one that I remember from childhood is Japanese Canadian picnics that had a bucket of KFC, but with the rice balls and tamagoyaki and wieners cooked in like a teriyaki. So I call them shoyu wieners. And so if anyone's interested, there's recipes in past issues of the Bulletin magazine for that.
Great. So I guess there's quite a few to
I
pull
think so.
from.
That's the Canadian part of Japanese Canadian.
Right. Yeah, that's
We have another question from Carolyn. Did your grandma have a Japanese style teapot like the ones that appear in your artworks?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Thanks. So the teapot that I based those paintings and the sculpture off of is actually a small teapot that I have at home that I got from her when she passed away. And so one thing I forgot to mention about the objects and why it's important to me as well is because at our house, yeah, we have a lot of objects that she passed on to us, and it's one of the stronger connections I have to her and also to the heritage. So that was a direct inspiration for the style of the teapot design.
I'm going to jump in again. There's another little hidden treasure secret with the teapot too, isn't there? Didn't you have a little assistant working on it?
Yeah, yes, that's right. So my son loves to help me whenever he can. So the process for making it, I think I sort of spoke about before, is it's just a big wire mesh, and then you take the paper pulp, which is just like basically ripped up little bits of paper used to make sheets of paper. So it's just like a sort of like a slop that you can just stick on to the form. And I had done about half of it, and I brought it home to try to dry it in the sun. And he was really excited about it. So we put it together with him and I, just putting the paper pulp on. So I have to credit him, I guess.
Hello? Hello?
Hello.
I don't know. I'm not sure how to access you, Sherri. Do you
Is
get
it
my
great?
Yes.
Nicola, can you
remember that I'm an 88-year-old woman, and technologically, I don't really know how to do this. But I would like to congratulate Kellen Hatanaka and thank him for doing this and incredible work. And I am so happy that the Asahi is the story of Asahi is being picked up by the younger generations. And I'm really very much looking forward to visiting personally the exhibition. So, Sherri, I will count on you to let me know when is the best time.
Absolutely.
And Kellen, I'm so happy. Thank you so much, and for the explanations. So I will wait to see it personally myself.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see in the chat too that there is a message from Deborah Hatanaka, and I'm going to read it. It is wonderful to see the walkthrough since we weren't able to be there. We are very proud of you, Kellen.
Okay, thank you. That's nice.
And also a message from one of our NNMCC board members, Louise Azukawa. It has to go soon, but she says, back to the question that someone asked about wieners. Tomato spaghetti shoyu wieners. I'm getting hungry, but I have to go. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks.
Any other questions coming in, Nicola?
Could I ask one question?
Absolutely.
Kellen, I'm wondering if you are in touch with or know about Yobun Shima in Japan, who does major research on the Asahi players' past history, their heritage in Japan. I wonder if you have access to his emails.
No, I don't. But
I think that's a good connect to make.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Yeah,
I can connect. I can connect.
Okay,
Kellen.
Sherri, I think.
And actually, Kellen doesn't have Yobun's contact, but Yobun has all of the information about this.
I know, I saw it.
So I'll connect them.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
That
Thank
reminder.
you. Yeah, that's great. That'd be awesome.
I think that might be it, unless there are any last comments. It's now 10 to 2, and we did promise to keep this under an hour. So I think you can paint that last eye into your daruma. I think we accomplished it. Unless there's anything else. I'm just going to check one more time with Nicola, whether there's anything else.
Just someone was trying to connect to audio, but it doesn't seem to be happening. So, yeah, I guess we could just formally end it, and we can just leave the channel open in case people want to talk directly to Kellen.
Okay, and there's going to be a recording of the formal part up until here available on our museum YouTube channel later. So for folks who couldn't watch today, for people who are on today and know of other people who would have loved to have caught this, there will be a link that you can forward soon. Great. Well, thank you, Kellen. Thanks, Nicola and Coco, and everyone who attended. And